April the 13th, 2022. We move now to Nigeria, where cases of domestic violence appears to have taken an upward swing, with reports showing that it is actually and it is still culturally acceptable in some Nigerian societies. Only recently, news of alleged domestic violence is said to have led to the death of Nigerian singer Osinachi Nwachukwu. Domestic violence has devastating consequences to the individuals and society at large. What can be done to curb these cases? Well, joining us is the Executive Director, Dorothy Njemanze. She is the Executive Director of a foundation that is called the Dorothy Njemanze Foundation, investigative journalist and filmmaker. That's a tongue twister for me.
That happens.
Many thanks for joining us, Dorothy. I mean, this is a serious scenario that we're talking about here in Nigeria, in Africa, and even the world at large. Now, can you tell us why we are having increasing cases of reports of incidents of violence and domestic abuse? Why do we have that now? We noticed that spike during the COVID-19 era, when the lockdown measures were put in place and people had no choice but to be stuck in that space with the violent person or the violator, as it were. But it seems the number keeps going upward even after that. What's going on, please?
Okay, thank you for having me on. What's going on is simple. What's going on is that the society has failed the people, who are victims of intimate partner violence. Intimate partner violence is just one of the types of domestic violence, right? And I believe that's what exactly we're focusing on here. And with intimate partner violence, it is sad that law enforcement in many places, particularly stigmatize against women that have children out of wedlock. And so where violence comes in those scenarios, a lot of law enforcement just mete out a lot of stigma instead of listening to the key issue, which is that violence is being perpetrated against these women, right? And then with people who are married, law enforcement, instead of treating things, despite the existence of the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act, that's the VAP Act, and then at state level, the different VAP laws that exist, law enforcement is still largely treating domestic violence situations or intimate partner violence situations and calling it family matter. They call it husband and wife matter, lovers matter. It's not lovers matter. When somebody speaks out, the person needs help. The person doesn't need condemnation. The person doesn't need excuses. What we hear from a lot of people in law enforcement is, oh, I'm only here doing the work that is supposed to put food on my table for my family. I'm not here to scatter an institution ordained by God. Absolutely no. Institution ordained by God is the one people enjoy. When it starts threatening the lives of people, then they're not enjoying it anymore. I constantly hear people say, oh, why didn't she live to live? Because the statistics show that women are predominantly, the victims. It doesn't mean that men are not, but most of the time, because of the patriarchal ideologies that we have been conditioned, socially conditioned to accept over time, women are more the victims, right? And so when these things come up, people say, oh, why didn't she live to live? The question is, why didn't she live to where? Where is she going to live to? Many women are still forcefully financially dependent on their spouses or their partners because of, the need to control them, right? And then when the person feels the person is tired, the person says, you know what, I'm tired of you, go, I'll look for another woman, just like that. Even the responsibilities of forced abandonment of dependents, which will cover the well-being and welfare of children that were birthed, is abandoned by these men without consequence. So over time, we've encouraged systems that have not supported these women. The religious and traditional institutions have woefully failed these women because a lot of times women are told, love like Christ love, forgive like Christ forgive, prove that you're a real Christian woman and forgive these things. You're not the only one going through all these things. Hide the shame of your family so that in the interest of your children, amongst other things. But the children are looking at the harmful practices and they're copying these harmful practices. And that is how next generation abusers are groomed effortlessly. So until we have systems that can support intimate partner survivors, intimate partner violence survivors, we're just, playing the game of hypocrisy. Gender responsive budgeting is still a thing that we dream of. Lagos State has the mandatory reporting policy, right? But if people report mandatorily, does the help come as it's supposed to come? Until we have systems in place that would realistically support survivors, what we're telling perpetrators is you have a field day to go on and do whatever it is you're so pleased to do with the life of any woman of your choice, And in response, also, if we keep on looking at it from only the perspective that women get abused, then when men are victims, where do the men go? Because the responses that exist now, many times they have empowerment packages like salon rollers and hair dryer, sewing machine, and all of that. For the few places where these things exist, absolutely not. That's not what the people need. These days, if you get a vehicle and give somebody, the person's means of transportation will be safer, and the person can do any of the, taxi services, online taxi services, and get some money. Now, my organization runs a shelter. We are struggling in the shelter to feed the people that come into the shelter. We have children with children in the shelter. We're struggling to access diapers. We're struggling to access food. We're struggling to access baby food, which is, a lot more expensive, right? When people fall sick, usually when they come to the shelter, give a maximum of 3 days, they will break down because they've been busy being strong all along. And, a lot of their body has been down, but they've just been mentally keeping their bodies up. When they break down, we take them to the hospital. Here, the police hospital supports us and treats these people, but keeps the bills for us, and we go begging. The government is not funding the access to medical processes for these people who need these services. For those of us with shelters, we don't get support, not even from the government. We don't get support to ensure that, the basics these people need are there. Then what's the exit strategy when they're in the shelter? Many of them, there's no exit strategy. The minimum that it would take to resettle people at that level is usually an average of 500,000 naira per person, per family, and that will cover rent of at least one room somewhere, possibly what's that thing? The fees that come with the rent that is paid. Aside the fees that will come with the rent that is paid, you have other bills like renovations, cost of movement. You put in the basics. Things for cooking, things to protect the person from the outside, being curtains, things to sleep on. By the time you finish doing that, you've almost exhausted 500,000 naira. Let's assume that somehow, miraculously, you manage to have 100,000 naira left. That is a small or medium business you're looking at. But many of those small or medium businesses would entail the person either doing a petty trading work or something of the sort. And then usually to now expose the person to the different task forces that come after small or medium businesses. So we don't have a proper plan in place. Gender responsive budgeting has not been gender responsive enough. Implementation of the different laws that exist have been a total and abysmal failure. And where there are no structures in place, there are no systems in place. If you force people to go and stay with extended family members, the people can barely cope with their own bills, and you're forcing new mouths on them. All that's going to happen is people are going to continue blaming the victim, and the victim will feel, you know what, the best place for me to do is go back to my abuser.
Okay.
And so we're forcing victims to go back to their abusers with the systems that exist.
All right, Dorothy, let's come in here and let's see this particular angle as well to this problem. It is no doubt a menace to society, but oftentimes, you mentioned it in your statement earlier, that when people seek for help, especially when you go to the police station, most of the victims say the police officers tell them, "Na husband and wife matter. It's a husband and wife problem. Go and solve it." So how can we change that narrative, especially from the security operatives, that area? And then how do you think the religious organizations have fared in helping in this matter?
Well, so law enforcement is supposed to protect life and order. And when law enforcement fails, even the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act has provisions for, frustration of investigations, right? And so you can take up a case against the particular officer, for frustrating investigation on a particular crime that has been identified that is known to law and has defined penalties. That's one thing that can be done. And then the religious institutions, the religious institutions are supposed to represent God in our lives, right? They're supposed to help boost our spirituality and everything, and not kill our spirituality. But a lot of the times, they make us endure a lot of injustice that is meted on us, especially as women. And that worsens the mental health condition of so many people. And so this is just a call to action to religious organizations. you know, if you don't side with the law, then you are siding against the people who are looking up to you and praying that God comes through for them in a just way, that God gives them access to justice. You know, if your religious institution does not have sexual harassment policy for the Sunday school, and you send your children to the place, then it means that if anything happens to your child there, you're on your own. If your religious institution is not one of the places that will hold your hand and take you to the police station to ensure that perpetrators are held accountable for the injustice done to you, then they actually truly are not practicing the will of God. And so we need to get to that point of taking our brains also into our religious places. And it's also applicable to the traditional institutions, because in the traditional and religious institutions, you have a lot of people who are revered there. And so when you come out and keep saying things like, I am not talking for divorce, so I'm not saying this about divorce, so excuse me. The primary thing here, the primary focus here is not divorce. The primary focus here is the violence. Divorce is just one of the options. Separation is another option. Divorce is just one of the options. So if you keep on coming out stigmatizing people who opt for the option that can keep them alive, then it means you have come out and openly endorse options that would definitely kill them.
Options that will kill them and options that will keep them alive is the focus here, Dorothy. But you spoke about punishments. Now, can you tell us what the punishment is according to the law for domestic violence or for domestic abuse, as the case may be?
Okay, so intimate partner violence, there's spousal battery, there's intimidation, there's forced financial dependence, there's stalking, there's a wide range of crimes that come into play when there's intimate partner violence. There's destruction of property with destruction of property with the will to inflict pain or something of the sort. All those things. So it depends on what the exact crime is that has been committed against this person. But mostly all these crimes have a jail sentence of from 2 years upwards. Sometimes with fine, sometimes it is the jail sentence and fine, but there is provision in the laws. These things are crimes known to law with defined penalties. So it behoves on us to ensure that we stand with the victims by ensuring justiciability of the laws and funding the process to ensure that the laws, exist. Currently in our shelter, we have a very pregnant woman. We have a pregnant woman in the shelter who is, at the time she was brought in last month, she's been there for a month now, but at the time she was brought in, she had a lot of injuries on her back because the man dragged her with her legs on the floor and was dragging her back all over the floor. This woman needs health insurance. That's the cheapest option that will take care of the medical needs of the woman and her children, right? We need to be able to buy health insurance plans for these people. We don't have the resources. The indignity in sourcing help for these people is that we go on social media constantly begging for money per case. Right now, we have up to 15 people in my organization that need accommodation. Where do we get it from? The CBN schemes, the different banks that you go to, all the financial institutions claim that they have different schemes for women to access funding. But the women who are supposed to access funding, the realities of survivors of intimate partner violence are not taken into cognizance. They will tell you that you should bring your account statement for the past 6 months. But your account statement for the past 6 months, if you're financially dependent on your abuser, would not reflect your financial capacity to even get a little money. But I tell you one thing, the emotional torture that these people have gone through makes them usually not want to get back into that condition. And statistics have it that women repay loans back, most of the time. They repay loans back more than men. And so you can imagine women in this condition able to access the finances they need to set up their lives so that they don't need to go back to that situation. It's going to help. So all our systems have looked at women as a homogeneous group and not looked at the realities of survivors of sexual and gender-based violence. So capture it in the different so-called schemes that exist for women. And that's a big anomaly. And until that anomaly is fixed, it means that we have systems in place that recognize the existence of women, but doesn't recognize the existence of women who are in need as a result of violence that they have, been put through. So it's a call to action for everybody. It's an indictment on the different systems that exist. Whether it's schemes for accessing accommodation from the Ministry of Housing, or it is schemes from the Commerce and Industry, there's a lot of indictments. or even the different import businesses. How can we bring in the Ministry of Humanitarian has failed us woefully, How can we bring in resources to support people who are in distress in times of peace in Nigeria? We should stop playing the optics and doing things, only when it looks like bandits have struck or there's this major catastrophe or lives have been lost. There are so many people in Nigeria, especially victims of intimate partner violence, that need support to ensure that they take decisions that, will save their lives. For now, people just feel, stuck with their abusers. The religious organizations are blaming them for daring to leave. The traditional institutions are trying to force them to stay because the validity of the hard work of many women has been linked to the availability of a man in her life, and that social conditioning has to change. It has to change. Women are just as valid and their decisions are valid enough.
All right, it surely has to change, especially with organizations such as what you have and with the laudable project that is ongoing under your initiative. Thank you so much, Executive Director Dorothy Njemanze Foundation, and investigative journalist and filmmaker. We really enjoyed your time, especially when it comes to the enlightenment and the information you've given on domestic abuse.
Thank you very much for having us. And it's a call to action for everybody, individuals, organizations. Ensure that you are investing your corporate social responsibility in supporting organizations like this, because that's the only hope people have. And if you have not done that, you have no right to say, child, why did she not leave? Why did she do that? It's hypocrisy.
All right.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dorothy.